record. Oh, that's good. Let's see if this works now. All right. We have Jen wants to enter.
Yeah, she said she'd send it.
Yeah.
Me too.
See if we can see.
That was loud.
Are you there? Oh, there you are.
Ralph, you don't want a tea or anything?
All right, so can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I was just saying that there's a lot in the writings on Africa that we're not going to cover, but we'll get some essentials. And yeah, we'll not minimize Zoom when they're transmitting. Okay, I won't minimize Zoom. So I'm going to go to share screen. This one. Share. That's all working. It's nice when technology does what it's supposed to. All right, Africa. So it's Africa today. Next time, Australia, and then we can try other things again, I guess. So here we go. One. So first is just a overview, because Africa, I think, is going to show up to be like Australia in the sense that lots of different tribes and variations. But even if you dig around, there's some common beliefs that kind of make their way through the whole continent. So here's some things that we think are unifying throughout African culture. And this is for the record, it's like sub-Saharan Africa. We're not going on the northern part because they are different. Sub-Saharan, these things kind of hang true. So one of the bits is about the unity of the natural and spiritual. Like there isn't a spiritual realm that's separate from the natural. They're all one. So the spiritual exists here with us. They're distinguishable, but they're one. And one of the things that you'll find is that there's a unity with ancestors. And we've seen ancestor worship in like basically every other culture we've looked at. So it's not an unusual thing, but ancestors are valued as members of the family. And the ancestors are also there for wisdom. So chiefs go to their ancestors to get advice. My kid's not behaving. Gee, Pop, what do? So ancestors are a big deal. And what surprised me about this is that it still continues in some parts of Africa to this day. For example, a Talensi man named Pooh left his family and settled with a rival group to earn more money. He then suffered an auto accident and serious leg injury. The diviner told him that ancestors were angry. He told him that his ancestors had intended to kill him, but failed to follow through on the plan. Solution: he had to make restitution for leaving his family, sever ties with the newly adopted family, and return home. Now, I guess your ancestors aren't very competent. They can't succeed at killing you. But I just kind of thought, well, this is odd that they still have this today. But when I started looking around on Google for African, what was the phrase? It's like African ancestor worship or something like that. I came across this, it was like 3 different videos that talked about dance rituals and stuff. Some was music, some was explanation, but they were African ritual type music and as I read through the comments, I found a couple of these little stories that I thought I'd share with you to let you know that this is still alive and well in Africa. Here's one. Right, here we go. My son had epilepsy seizures. His last seizure was so bad, he literally died in my arms. I called on my ancestors. I cried out to them. At first, I was frustrated. Then I calmed myself. I meditated. I closed my eyes. I blocked out my husband screaming, my other 2 children crying. My family was in tears. I simply asked my ancestor to help my son lead him back to us. Several hours later, the doctor came in and said, your son started back breathing. This has never happened. He looked at me like he saw a ghost. He was really spooked. I ran to the room. My son opened his eyes and said, Grandma. So again, this is a comment off of a YouTube video. And here's another one. My mom been dead since I was 11. My kids never met her. When my son died, well, this is the same story. So, when my son died, he said he saw her, and then she led him back to his body. I asked him about what did he see? I was so eager to know. He said he saw Grandma, and she said she loved us. She took his hand and he said, told him it's not his time to join them, follow her because I needed him. I literally froze, and since then, I speak out to our ancestors. When I fast from foods, TV, phone, I speak. This also released me from depression. My son used to have seizures out of nowhere from school to home. I lost my job at the time due to his sickness. My husband and I had many problems at first. Now my family is closer than ever thanks to our ancestors. My mom listened to me. This happened 7 years ago, but just to know she was there, I can't explain how much that meant to me. I don't know. It's interesting.
These are African people?
Mhm. Yeah, so I know I said it before, but the African ministers, I mean, they talk about this stuff kind of like, yeah, it's just kind of matter of fact. And in the West here, we just don't, in the West, in Australia.
What sort of date, what date would you apply to that?
A few years ago.
And
A few years ago. It's relatively recent. So, you know, the focus of this series has been seeing ancient church and other cultures, but you know, every now and again we see the ancient church alive and well in something that's modern culture. So you have that. Another characteristic of that culture is that everything's sacred. When I went to Alice Springs and Uluru a few years ago, it was kind of a running joke that, everything's sacred. Oh, you can't touch this, that's sacred. Oh, you can't do over here, that's sacred. You can't go over here, that's sacred. Don't look at that, that's sacred. Don't touch that, it's sacred. And I'm like, my gosh, everything's sacred out here. These guys think everything's sacred. And I was kind of being sarcastic at the time, but I realized, no, I think that's actually true. They really do think everything's sacred. And that's the frustration for us Westerners who think, oh, well, the sacred, that's just right there next door in the church. Everything else is a free-for-all. But for them, you know, it's just not how it is. And I get it. And so they think, you know, nature isn't there to be manipulated. It's not there to be destroyed. It's not to be mucked with. You just treat it with respect. So I think this probably comes from this idea that spiritual and natural have this unity. You know, when you see that the spiritual and natural are so tied in, you know, suddenly nature has a different meaning to it as opposed to looking around and seeing birds as just a sack of meat flying in the air with feathers. You know, it's a different way to look at things.
is that all women? Is that all women?
In that picture, I don't know. Looks like it.
Mhm.
Looks like it. Hard to tell. But I'm gonna go say yes. So another one here. medicine. And this is one I think we're starting to get a clue in about. You need spiritual and natural remedies. You've got a COVID case, well, they need a little bit of this and a little bit of that, something from both buckets. And for them, there's no such thing as a natural remedy that doesn't have a spiritual remedy that goes with it. Yeah. No real surprise there, I don't think. All right, and for our next one, I'll share some of the reading at this point. Anybody want to read a slide?
I'll read that if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Single supreme God. Adroa is the sky god and the supreme god and creator. It's believed that Adroa created a set of twins who were the first man and woman on earth.
That's why I think I gave this one up.
Bara and Memi. Memi gave birth to all the animals, as well as another pair of male-female twins. The fascinating thing about these twins was that they had magical powers, and from them, many pairs of male-female twins were born, until Jackie and Tribidu, the hero ancestors, were born. It is their sons who are said to be the founders of the present Lugbara clans of Uganda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
All right. So, main points on this, right? Supreme God. There's one God. He's the big dog, and that's what most ancient church, according to the writings, it's all about. It's one God, unity. I said of twins, right? We're the first man, first woman on the earth. All right. So first, my mind goes to twins, and I think Cain and Abel. But when he says the first man and woman on the earth, I go, oh, that's probably the Adam and Eve equivalent. Eve did not give birth to the animals, mind you, but she did give birth to a pair of twins. So that's Cain and Abel, perhaps. I don't think we really have any evidence in Scripture that these people had magical powers. The hero ancestors, I mean, who's that? Is that Noah and his family? I don't know. But it'd be their sons who would be the founders of the rest of civilization and the Noah story. So, some similarity, but the big thing is we're seeing a single supreme God. Another one, next one we have here for you. Cliff, you wanted me to read one? How about you do this one?
Okay. Anansi, the trickster spider. Anansi is a mythological figure who mainly appears as a spider, but can take on human form and features in many West African cultures. He's also known as the spirit of all knowledge and tales, and is particularly fond of playing tricks on the unsuspecting, whether they be humans, animals, or even the gods. Thanks to his wide knowledge and cunning ways, he's able to trick even the cleverest of victims. Can I say something about that?
Sure.
In Norse mythology, Loki was the trickster god.
Mm-hmm.
So they've all got their little trickster gods. Even you could say Satan, the greatest deceiver, liar, everything, trickster, everything. There you go. Anyway.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this? Because I had some, that's interesting. I had some thoughts on this one too. I mean, for me, I'm thinking about the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, there you go. There's another one. Yeah.
Right. You know, what's he doing with Eve? He's tricking her. He's deceiving her, whether they be, playing tricks on the unsuspecting, whether they be humans, animals, even the gods, able to trick even the cleverest of victims. And the spider, that's, you get in the web, the serpent, well, writings about the serpent being the symbol for the senses, the slithers on the ground. I guess they have spiders in the Holy Land. But for whatever reason, we got that in Africa. So yeah, a little bit of a parallel there. Anybody, who else? You want to read one? All right, go for it.
Bumba vomits up the universe. Bumba is an African creator god, specifically noted in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who had an intense need for company. He was lonely and unwell until he vomited and created the universe and everything in it. First came the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then the planets. Not quite done, he belched again, and 9 animals and some humans appeared. The 9 animals multiplied, created every creature we know today.
There you go. So, right. What's our new church connection here, huh?
I was wondering if it was unwell.
You got all that in you, yeah.
It's the need for company, the need for others outside of himself.
Yeah, that's what I saw too. You know, what is the purpose of us? Is to have the human race to fill the heavens. So God kind of has company, right?
Yeah, I was thinking that too,
So, you know, you have that teaching in there, you know, because how many people go through life wondering what's the point of life?
Mm.
And, you know, well, here it is. Bumba tells us right here, you know, it's, he's lonely. He's lonely. I mean, you gotta imagine now, you're the supreme being and you're almighty and everything, but what good is being almighty if you don't have a ability to show how almighty you are? I'm the fastest go-kart driver in the universe. Nobody knows. There's an old joke about a pastor who called in sick on a Sunday, and he goes off to play golf. You know, and he figures none of his congregation will know because, well,
They'll be in
he'll be at
church.
church. And he goes to the golf course. And of course, God's watching all this. The guy tees up, cracks the ball, hole in one. God just kind of shoved it on there. And then the angel says, "What did you do that for?" God's like, "Who's he gonna tell?"
Sweet revenge.
That's good. Yeah, who's he gonna tell?
I'm wondering what the significance of 9 animals is.
Tangents. Right, so in Bumba's second paragraph here, so what comes first in the creation story? Sun, moon, and stars, and then the planets.
Mm.
Because the sun's the 4th day, isn't it? It's light and dark, water's above, water's below. I think it's then you have vegetation, and then it's sun, moon, and stars come on the 4th day. We don't have any about other planets, right? It doesn't mention it specifically. Not quite done. He bustles again, and 9 animals and some humans appear, and that's kind of the creation story.
At what point did he create the earth?
Bumba?
Doesn't mention the earth.
No. Oh, that's true. So yeah, it doesn't say, it doesn't call out the earth, does it? So sun and stars, and then the planets, and the earth is just one of the planets. That'd be my guess. So anyway, yeah, it's just you don't get that anywhere but Africa, right? So here's a creation flood myth in East Africa. Here, take another one. Yeah.
A probable creation and flood myth in Portuguese East Africa. To sum this story up, a woman made a clay doll and hung it to dry. When the doll was dried, it came to life, and the woman took it off her drying rack. The clay doll made friends with girls and convinced her to go to the harvest dancing contest and convinced the clay girl to go, despite fears that she might dissolve back into clay.
Mhm.
It rained and the girl started to dissolve. On the way back to her mother, one of her legs fell off. The clay girl hopped home on the other leg while calling for her mother.
Wants to do another one.
She made it back to her mother, who fixed her and hung her to dry. When the clay girl was let back down, the girls once again convinced her to go to the dances and offered to give her their umbrella. Unfortunately, the rains came to be too heavy for the girls, and they snatched the umbrella back, leaving the clay doll to dissolve in the rain again. This time, all of her limbs fell off, just her head was left, and her mother scolded her, telling her that this time she was going to leave her to dissolve them completely.
Man, that's harsh.
That's really. No, not all right.
Right. Unless you dissolve completely. Man, can you imagine that? Imagine little Stuart coming home. It's all right, buddy, all I had is left.
Just the brain in a jar by the door.
Oh, that's rough.
Stay out there in the rain.
You know, you shouldn't disobey me. Shouldn't have disobeyed me. So we have a somewhat biblical similarity here, right? You know, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race, and then the Lord regretted making the human race, and he's going to wipe them out. So on this African one, well, what causes the clay girl's problem? Disobedience, right? Oh, she didn't obey, and just like the people didn't obey the Lord, so they didn't obey. So it's kind of tied to a flood myth that the gods in both cases created the beings and decided that they were not worthy of being saved due to their disobedience. So the only way to solve the problem was to have a flood, or in this case, just rain. Which either way, it's water, though, right? Water is the common thread of destruction. So a little side story about my trip on this. So what was going to happen if I had problems with the COVID and I had to escape before I could do the memorial service was the pastor of the church was going to read the service that I had provided. And we had talked in advance about, you know, he's like, oh, well, if you have doctrine in there that I can't support, you know, I might edit that out.
Mhm.
All right. I wasn't too fussed about it because I figured I wasn't going to have anything in there that was going to upset him. I'm not talking about the Trinity and the oneness and all that kind of stuff, you know. Wasn't too fussed about it. But I did have in there because Val apparently was a beach goer, and she had this whole policy about telling the truth and how important it was to tell the truth and a seeker of truth. I had something in there about how water is a symbol for truth in the scripture. Well, after the service is over, so before the service starts, this guy, his name is Ian, he comes up to me, looks kind of like Brian Keith, but with a mustache, comes up to me and says, I'm really interested to hear your service. Because he hadn't seen it yet. And he said, I'm really interested to hear your service. And I sensed there was a legitimate intellectual curiosity as to how this was going to go and, you know, broaden his horizons kind of thing. And I said, that's all right. I said, I await your judgment. And no, I'm just messing with you, you know. And so after the service, I said, well, how'd you go? I don't know, what'd you make of it?
How'd you go?
And he goes, oh, well, and he's sheepishly, he's trying to be nice. He says, well, I wasn't sure about that whole comment about water being a symbol of truth, because I could think of some contrary examples of that. And I'm like, oh, well done, no problem. I am equipped to answer this question.
Bring it.
And so we talked about, you know, it has a symbol and its opposite. You know, it's fire. It can be like the burning bush where it doesn't consume, but fire can consume. It's love. It's selfish. And good and bad, and just look around the world, right? Internet, amazing, terrible, all the same thing. Everything has its good and its bad sides to it. So, like you, he's like, yeah, all right, kind of see that. And I was like, yeah, that's right, I got you there, buddy. So that of course ties back into here in our flood story, and that water, in this case, rain, is perhaps a symbol of falsity. That the little doll girl, clay doll girl, filled with falsity, and that's what she was dissolved by. She was just evil has its own punishment. So there you go. Maybe I'm stretching, but that's what I got for you here. All right. So what I want to go into next is kind of a bit more specific stuff in Africa. I think we've heard at some point or another that science seems to have this theory that Africa is the cradle of humanity. That's not consistent from what I gather. Not everybody agrees that Africa is the cradle of humanity, but some do. And
just this week, they found the oldest human remains in Africa. It's over 120,000 years old.
Wow, I didn't know
there we go. 10 points for you for that.
that.
Backing up the pastor. That's great. The writings tell us that the Africans were a celestial race, and that this celestial quality has been maintained in Central Africa. So it makes some sense that perhaps that is where humanity began. My kind of thing is, I have a hard time buying that there's a single central spot. I tend to think there's, probably a few spots in the world where humanity began, kind of thing. And this happens to be one where early humans were, and the early ones were the celestial ones, right? So maybe there's a connection to the most ancient church. And with that in mind, I want us to read a few numbers from Swedenborg's book, Continuation of the Last Judgment. Now, see, Joe, it was about a year or two ago, I did a class that everybody else here remembers very clearly. But because you're here, I'll take a little moment to refresh you on this. I mean, unless Ralph wants to tell you about it, but
I have no idea what you're talking about. You're talking about the posthumous last judgment.
Yeah, no, that's the one that you loved so much. In that class, we looked particularly at Muslims, and I think it was the Dutch, and basically how Swedenborg, it gets this picture of Swedenborg on the mountain and seeing how these things are all happening. It's like a physical manifestation of people shuffling around heaven and reordering things. And so while we did it for other countries and stuff like this is from Africa, but it's the same kind of idea where he's kind of seeing some things happening in the spiritual world. So it's kind of interesting. Got a few slides of this. Anybody want to take one? Cliff, all right.
The Africans and the Gentiles in the spiritual world. The Gentiles who know nothing concerning the Lord appear around those who know of him, so that no other make the extreme circumference. Is it that circumference? But those who are altogether idolatrous and have adored the sun and the moon. But they who acknowledge one God and make precepts like those of the Decalogue a part of religion and of life are seen in a higher region, and thus communicate more immediately with the Christians in the centre. For thus the communication is not intercepted, but the Mohammedans and Papists is not intercepted by them. Is not accepted or intercepted?
Intercepted.
Oh,
Yeah, so you've got Christians in the center,
yeah.
and so it's telling you that the Muslims and the Catholics are further outside, but
Oh,
makes it a way to get past those people so they don't falsify and corrupt communications.
wow.
So it keeps on going here. Or one of you, you're up to Mary, I think, right? Your turn? Whose turn is it?
All right.
You can read it? All right, go for it. We're
The
just taking it.
Gentiles are also distinguished according to their genius and faculty of receiving light through the heavens from the Lord. For there are some of them who are more interior and some who are more exterior. And these diversities are not derived from their place of birth, but from their religion. The Africans are more interior than the rest.
Shouldn't that be on our billboards of Africa? We think you guys are the best. All right. Next one up for whoever wants to grab it.
There are many societies of Gentiles, especially from the Africans, who, on being instructed by the angels concerning the Lord, say that it cannot be otherwise than that God, the creator of the universe, should appear in the world. Because he created them and loves them, and that the appearance must be made before the very eyes in the human form.
I find that in my experience of life, a lot of people have a hard time believing that Jesus was God. It's a stumbling block.
Oh, big time.
It's a stumbling block, especially when you talk to Muslims. They're, oh, Jesus was a good guy. God, I'm not going to make that jump. But here it's the opposite. Of course, it can't be otherwise than that God would have shown himself. Of course he does. It's a different kind of way of flipping it, right? Of course God will show up. Okay. Next.
When they are told that he did not appear as the angels are wont to appear, but that he was born man and thus became visible, they hesitate a while and inquire whether he was born from a human father. And on hearing that he was conceived by God of the universe, the God of the universe, and born of a virgin, they say that thus he has the divine essence itself, which because it is infinite and life itself, he was not such a man as others are.
Right.
Who's saying this?
The Africans are saying that, of course, he was not conceived by a man of the world. So it's one of those, it goes back to one of those teachings that I think a lot of new church people don't realize, just how much of our doctrine hangs on this idea that the soul comes from the Father. The whole Advent story of Christmas hangs on this idea that the soul comes from the Father. I think if more of our laity were aware of this teaching, they would revolt. They go, oh, that's hard to believe. I don't know. Well, I have a daughter and she sure seems like she's a lot like her mother. So, or a son who's like his mother kind of thing. So I think it's a hard one, but Swedenborg's doubling down on it here. You know, the Africans, when they hear that, you know, that it had to have come from, he was conceived by God, the universe, and born of a virgin. They go, well, okay, it's got the divine essence.
Whether or not you accept the natural of that statement, the celestial correspondence is that Father is good. As goodness represents goodness. So from that sense, only good can give life.
Yeah, I haven't thought of it like that. But yeah, I see that.
Interesting, sorry, it's a little diversion, was I was studying the Divine Love and Wisdom, and there's a side note that Swedenborg never uses a gender to refer to God, except in 2 occasions when he calls God the Creatrix, which is a feminine form.
Oh.
Only twice, and then he uses the feminine form. But there's no equivalent in English of that, you know, non-gender assignment.
But wow, how can this refers to God as he, like everywhere?
Yeah, when you talk about the Lord, of course it's he, because it was a man.
So I mean, I don't know how it holds up that he only referred to God twice. I mean, I know you get what you're saying. There's a couple places where you can make the case he did refer to God in a non-male form, But I don't know, I have to look at that, because I feel like he's referring to God as a he throughout the whole thing. And I don't know if I don't know how much of that is a component of the Latin that's written.
Right,
Yes,
of the
it is a
translation,
component of that.
yeah.
Latin has a neuter form of reference to people,
Correct.
which English doesn't.
Correct. Well, we have they, right? But it's not a singular.
Hmm.
And that would cause even more problems.
I can show you later what the evidence is.
No, all right. I'm up for evidence. All right, next one. I'll do this one. I'll do one. They are afterwards informed by the angels that in aspect he was like another man, but that when he was in the world, his divine essence.
Well, you refer to Jesus.
Yeah, I know, I'm being cheeky. His divine essence, which in itself is infinite and life itself, rejected the finite nature and its life from the mother, and thus made his human, which was conceived and born in the world, divine. The Africans comprehended and received these things because they think more interiorly and spiritually than others. Again, wouldn't that be great on Billboard in Ghana? I said something to another guy about that. You know, why don't we ever use this stuff to promote to Africans? They thought it was a bad idea. So anyway.
Such being the character of the Africans, even in this world, there is at the present day a revelation with them, which commencing in the center is communicated around.
In the center, right?
Yeah, is communicated around, but does not reach the seas. They acknowledge our Lord as the God of heaven and earth and laugh at the monks in these parts they visit and at the Christians who talk of threefold divinity and of salvation by mere thinking, saying that there is no man who has any worship who does not live according to his religion, and that whosoever does not must become stupid and wicked, because then he receives nothing from heaven.
Continues on.
Ingenious wickedness they also call stupidity, because in it there is not life but death. I have heard the angels rejoicing over this revelation, because by means of it, a communication is open for them with the human rationale. Heathrow, closed up by the blindness which has been drawn over the things of faith, it was told me from heaven that the truths now published in the doctrine of the New Jerusalem concerning the Lord, concerning the word, and in the doctrine of life for the New Jerusalem are orally dictated by angels, spirits to the inhabitants of that country.
I mean, I think that's a pretty big deal that there's a level of revelation going on in Central Africa. I mean, you just don't get that kind of thing from the writings where it's saying, oh, well, this is the second coming, but there's also a second coming happening in China or in America. Where you don't have that anywhere else. He's saying, no, there's revelation going on in there. So I think that's pretty unique to Africa. But speaking of Central Africa, so there's this book, Pygmy Kitabu, Jean-Pierre Hallet. I hope my wife here appreciates my pronunciation there. So this book, from what I gather, is a collection of pygmy myths, but it's a lot of what it is defending the myths as African originals, not knockoffs from scripture. You know, it's trying to make the case, hey, these guys didn't get the Bible and then make myths. They had these before the Bible existed. So, because in pygmy religion, as you see on the slide here, they discover a very ancient account of the Garden of Eden, as well as a father God and a mortal savior who overcomes evil. Mortal savior being Jesus equivalent. They also find equivalents to the Exodus stories, which as well as much Egyptian, Semitic, Indian, and Scandinavian mythology. So I tried to find a copy, but I can't find a copy of this book on the continent. And I didn't have my e-reader with me at the time to download one. But it might be one of those things that I investigate further and present more on. But I did find some excerpts online that gives us some of this creation myth. So, all right, let's take a reader who wants to read.
All right.
All right.
The creation of humans. The creator Krum lived alone in his village. He passed his time smoking, but he got bored. There was no one to prepare his food or to share it. He decided to create people to keep him company. He went into the forest and collected many, many Nakula nuts so that they filled his game bag.
Next.
Then he returned to his village and went to the waterfront where he had left his canoe. He got into the canoe and called his crocodile. The crocodile came and he fastened a harness on it and told him to pull the canoe far out into the waters. The crocodile swam far, far out until there was nothing but water all around him.
And there, Krum told it to stop. He removed a nut from his bag and rubbed it in his hands for some time, then blew on it and threw it back towards the land, saying, "You shall be the first man." The next nut he called a woman, and so on until all the nuts from his bag had been sent back towards the land. When he reached the shore, all the people were waiting for him in the village. He gave them their places, and for a time he lived with them there. It was a wonderful time. He's just living with all the nuts.
Well done. I didn't see that.
He's in charge, so.
Well done. Okay. So I was so focused on the earth, Adam made from the earth, and how was that put into a nut? But I can't focus on that now.
Sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
It's all right. So we think of early Genesis, right? He lived with them. God is present in the garden with Adam and Eve. We had the comment about him being lonely, right? Something like that. Yeah, he was bored. And yeah, he looked at the company. So we've had that again and some other African myths. It's a good teaching to have. The whole crocodile thing, yeah, I don't know what to make of that. But anyway, it gets better. So that's your opening bit to the myth, and then we have our Adam and our Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve serpent story. So here we go. Next reader. Cliff, you want to do one? Sure, go for it.
One fine day in heaven, God told his chief helper to make the first man. The angel of the moon descended. He modeled the first man from earth, wrapped the skin around the earth, poured blood into the skin, and punched holes for the nostrils, eyes, ears, and mouth. He made another hole in the first man's bottom and put all the organs in his insides. Then he breathed his own vital life force into the little earthen statue. He entered into the body, it moved, it sat up, it stood up, it walked. It was Ephe, the first man and father of all who came after. Well, that fits in pretty well with the creation story in a way, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because it says that in the Bible, the Lord breathed air into Adam, didn't he?
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. God said to Ephe, "Beget children to people my forest. I shall give them everything they need to be happy. They will never have to work. They'll be lords of the earth. They will live forever. There's only one thing I forbid them. Now, listen well. Give my words to your children and tell them to transmit this commandment to every generation. The tahu tree is absolutely forbidden to man.
Isn't that amazing?
You must never, for any reason, violate this law. So as a little side note, these pictures I've had on the last couple of slides, these are from that part of Africa. So if you, yeah, that's you'll see a couple more coming, but these are these pygmy people in Central Africa. And this is their little, I don't know what you call it, little hut.
If they obeyed these instructions, he and his children never went near the tree. Many years passed. The god called to Efe, "Come up to heaven, I need your help." So Efe went up to the sky. After he left, the ancestors lived in accordance with his laws and teachings for a long, long time. Then, one terrible day, a pregnant woman said to her husband, "Darling, I want to eat the fruit of the tahu tree." He said, "You know that's wrong." She said, "Why?" He said, "It's against the law." She said, "That's a silly old law. Which do you care about more, me or some silly old law?"
It's a woman. It's a woman.
Oh,
And I find it interesting. It's a pregnant woman, which kind of makes some sense, right? She's craving something. You know, women pregnant, you know, they get their cravings. That's what I've been told. The other thing I find interesting on that is the end of the first paragraph. He lives in accordance with the teachings for a long, long time. This is one of those things that always confounds me. How long is a long, long time? You know, when Swedenborg talks about the most ancient church and the posterity and the generations, it's like, well, it's similarly vague. You know, how long really was that around for? It doesn't tell us.
The earliest humans were 120,000 years ago. The ancient church could have been a long, long time.
Yeah, well, and then, you know, but you pack in pre-Adamites, humans that weren't fully spiritual yet, and it's like, yeah. So we've been working with the idea the ancient church was, say, from 9,000 BC to 1,000 BC, kind of in that rough range. There's still a lot of time for a most ancient church of pre-Adamites, and I think it's Swedenborg who says that the most ancient church was a few generations or something. Well, a few generations, that's 100 years. It's like, well, wait a second. Well, this is a long, well, how long is a long time? I know what's a few generations. How generous are you being with a few? And because I'm with you, like I see that humans have been around for a long time. And so even if you roll back the most ancient church, 50,000 years of time. And that's a long time.
That's a long time.
Yeah. But when you consider that in comparison to how long the Jewish church lasted, 1,000 years or so, Christian church, 1,700 years. That's the time spans aren't usually terribly long, but I think these ancient ones were quite a bit longer. Anyway, husband and wife, they argued and argued. Finally, he gave in. His heart pounded with fear as he sneaked into the deep, deep forest. Closer and closer he came, and there it was, the forbidden tree of God. The sinner picked a tahu fruit. He peeled the tahu fruit. He hid the peel under a pile of leaves. Then he returned to camp and gave the fruit to his wife. She tasted it. She urged her husband to taste it. He did. Well, all the other pygmies had a bit. Everyone ate the forbidden fruit, and everyone thought God would never find out. That wasn't a good bet, was it?
Never.
All right, next up.
Meanwhile, the angels of the moon watched on high. He rushed a message to his master. "The people have eaten the fruit of the tahu tree." God was infuriated. "You have disobeyed my orders," he said to the ancestors. "For this you will die."
You've heard that before? God's got this thing about a forbidden tree. And yeah, so it's I can't escape the idea that from my perspective, clearly God's seeding these things all around the world, these creation stories and whatnot. And I just find it very interesting that this book is, it's written a number of years ago, but their whole thing is, oh no, these are not rip-offs from the Bible. And it's just like, that wouldn't have occurred to me. A similar version of this myth can be found a bit north, where the Congo is. It says around the Muduti or the Bambuti, which are also pygmy group. So, another thing I think about pygmy, right? When we see the story in Noah's Ark, right, there are giants in the land, which by comparison tells you that the good people are small. So,
Yeah, but pygmy small?
yeah, that's true. Mary, you want to do?
God made the first man and woman and put them in a forest. They had everything, including an abundance of food at their fingertips. God told them that they should have children and that all humanity would live forever. He warned them not to eat the fruit of the tower tree. Both the man and woman agreed that they would leave the fruit untouched. The man was uninterested in the tahu fruit. However, during her pregnancy, the woman found that she had a terrible craving for it.
Heard this before, haven't you?
So the man stole the fruit for her, and together they peeled and ate it. They hid the peels beneath a pile of leaves, but God created a wind and uncovered the peels. He was very angry that they would break their promise, and turning to the woman, God said that woman would suffer pain in childbirth.
Mhm.
God then told the couple that from that moment on, they would both have to work hard, suffer illness, and would eventually die.
Straight out of the Bible.
Yep,
Amazing.
same story, isn't it?
Same story. Yeah, it's amazing.
So, yeah, woman's the problem and corrupts man. We didn't have the childbirth pains in the previous pygmy story, but this one has it. They have to work hard and suffer illness, and that's the same thing about being kicked out of the garden. You will suffer pain, get kicked out, and they got to toil for the land now. So I mean, it's similar. It's similar. So anyway, that's all the stories I have for you tonight. But it's one of those, this is one of these things that just kind of, to me, solidifies what the writings teach us about this idea that there's one God over all the religions, that the ancient people all had a similar idea of spirituality. They understood the connection. They understood where things went wrong. Right? It's the woman is that symbol for desire, right? She's that's the corrupting side of it. The man's the symbol for the intellectual side. And what do we do when we desire something? We justify it. So the man comes over and joins in on the forbidden fruit eating thing too. And Swedenborg says that all these tales were written to contain spiritual truths in them. Well, they're all teaching their people the same thing, right? That this basic dynamic is the fundamental problem for humanity, that we have a desire that we then justify and partake in doing. And I mean, even today, isn't that really kind of like the fundamental problem of humanity? We desire things that aren't good for us.
Oh, yeah.
How many people know, oh, gee, I shouldn't do that, but we justify, we do it anyway. I mean, you talk to me about smoking cigarettes, it's bad for you, but you do it. And it's like, oh, that's the problem. It doesn't matter with smoking or drugs or sex or ego trips, all sorts of stuff. You can just pile on. That's the fundamental issue. You desire to be the best, to have everybody think you're the best, So you justify the things that you do. You justify being a jerk because you have some desire to show off something else. And from that, we eventually die, right? Yeah, we have to work hard and suffer illnesses and yeah. So I guess the older I've gotten, the more I've looked at that story, I just think, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there in that Adam and Eve story.
But it reminds me of the story of the Buddha there, Todd. You know, his Garden of Eden was his ignorance and his palace. He didn't know he was going to die. He didn't know. To him, life was fantastic. His parents never told him about disease or anything. And then he walked out of his palace, which was his Garden of Eden.
All right.
Well, what's that mean over there? Well, he's got a disease. He's sick and he's dying. What's that person over there? Well, he's old. We're not going to become like that. That's going to happen to me. Well, yeah. Big revelation that was. I tell you what, I didn't know that. You didn't know that?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, that's innocence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you leave the garden because you've lost your innocence.
Exactly. Well, yes, that's it. Yeah, you left the garden. You've lost it. You did too, didn't you? Really went in there. Well, is this the world? Is it? Yeah, I'm afraid it is, mate. This is it. Yep.
So anyway, yeah, there you go. There's some stories. Spend the next couple of weeks to kind of dig up some stuff on Australia. We'll finish with the Great Down Under, and hopefully we can see. I've found a couple things so far, but what I'm expecting is that we're going to find a lot of similarity between Australia and Africa, quite frankly.
Well, to the Aborigines, the snake was the one that created everything. The snake.
Okay. But the thing is with Australia is I just feel like there's so much difference between the tribes.
Oh yeah.
From when I've poked around at this before, there's not much in the way of a common unifying thread.
No.
That's what makes Australian mythology so difficult to kind of tie into new church teachings. It's like you can do it for this one and for this one individually, but it's hard to wrap them all around with a common thread and tie them that way.
You never know. You could find something there.
I will be poking around. I'll be asking my colleagues around the world, and say, "Oh, do you guys ever come across anything?"
Interesting.
This was one of them who pointed me towards that pygmy book, and there was another one they recommended to. I was like, "Guys, I don't have time to read 2 books." And 2 books. I don't have time to read 2 books that I can't find on this continent. So, but I think you got enough of a taste of it to have an idea of what some of the stuff is. But I think that pygmy book would probably be really interesting. I might seek that out and read that at a later date because it's fun. All right, well, I am going to end the show, and screen sharing is stopped. Yes, okay, good. So good night.
See you tomorrow.
You're not going over?